very interesting dream. My wife had a friend over from work or from something over to her home, and we were kind of sitting back and talking about, I guess, some things about life and some other stuff. And the guy had a pretty nice truck outside, and I noticed that they were going back and forth and looking back and forth at cars, and my wife has an SUV. So things were sort of like going on, and I didn't really sort of have the best feeling about the guy, but it was my wife's friend, so usually trust what your friends say. And as we are kind of just chilling out, I got a sense that my wife was going to make a decision that she didn't really talk to me about. So I approached her on the topic, on the subject, and I was like, hey, I heard you were talking about trying to sell something. What are you trying to sell? And my wife says, well, I look at the truck and I don't think we really need the truck. So I was thinking of not really using it right now, but sort of coming back when I need it, and just kind of like, let someone use the truck, and when I need it again, I'll just kind of get it back. So I was like, okay, well, it kind of sounds like a lease that you're doing. So if you're doing a lease, tell me the spread. How much are you going to be making from it? And I don't know, the numbers were kind of out of the water, but this could have really applied to anything. She said, oh, well, it cost me $3,200. I don't know a car that costs $3,200 a month, but one day or eventually there will be. So I was like, okay, well, you're making, it costs you $3,200 a month. How much are you going to be making? She said $3,800 a month. So that would be considered your spread. So your spread, if you ever have something that you lease it out to someone else, and let's say it costs you $3,200, and you get to lease it back to them for $3,800, then you make a $600 spread. Now, if you look at everything, that's a pretty decent amount of money. So I couldn't argue about kind of that particular piece, but then some things started sort of coming up where I'm just like, well, how are you protecting yourself? Because if you're leasing that out, let's say it's a car, let's say you're doing it for an Uber service, someone else is driving it, what happens if there's an accident? Who's the person, that gets involved in an accident coming after? They're not coming after the person driving the car. They're coming after the person that owns the car. So the first thing I told her, I was like, hey, you got to get that out of your name. And then I guess the gentleman that had been over, that had sort of given their idea, was sort of going back and forth with me as far as, oh, well, you can make money off of this and everything else. And the only thing that I could think about was risk. And that's one thing that no one that I really know really ever talks about. They talk about how much money they can make in doing something, but they don't talk about the risk in it. And that's the topic I actually wanted to kind of focus on, is the reason folks aren't focused on risk is because it's almost like the other things that you don't really learn in school. You don't really get taught about finance in school. You don't really get talked about mindset in school. You don't really talk about risk so much in school. Everyone takes risks, but there's not this idea of what's an educated risk versus a non-educated risk. So the first thing I'm thinking about is, hey, if you're leasing something, doesn't matter what it is, whatever asset it is, the worst thing that could be in place is that if you don't have, or if you have that asset in your name. Because if you have it in your name and if anything happens, it's coming back on you. Now, anyone that can look at society today, if you trip and fall at a casino, if you get involved in some major accident, folks look at that as a payday. And they look at it as a payday where it's just like, oh, well, whoever was vacuuming that carpets, I'm going to, sue them. Or whoever was, driving that vehicle or doing this or doing that time, I'm going to sue them. I mean, they could kind of put the target there, but they want to sue the bigger fish. And the reason they want to sue the bigger fish is because most folks think that, okay, if I get involved in some type of big accident, I don't ever want to have to work again. I don't ever want to have to worry about money again. And the only way you can do that is if you sue the biggest fish that's involved within that. And that's usually the owner. So I kind of look at that and I was like, man, and as all this is going on, as all this is transpiring, I realized that all of a sudden I'm in this field and I have all these people listening and there's a bigger and a bigger crowd starting to form. And I'm just like, this is interesting. I mean, I don't really kind of sort of get all this, but I just got really impassioned with what I was speaking about. And there were just more and more people. And then the topic kind of got bigger and bigger, where it wasn't really just so much about my wife kind of like Lisa's car. It's kind of like this general common misconception that, okay, let me make the money but not worry about the risk. And so the reason I think it hits on something bigger is that what happens in this country right now where some type of organization can make a lot of money, but they thought about the risk piece and they don't have any risk. So let's say, for example, I was going to lease something out. Doesn't matter what the asset is. And I can do it without actually having to own it. So I can, let's say, lease out the car or lease out, whatever, without actually having to own it. If I don't own it and I can still make money off of it, I've removed a lot of the risk. Now, the biggest thing is, okay, my protection, depending on, what that particular asset could be or whatever, that property is, I could be liable with that. But the big thing there is I'm not putting my own name on it. So think about a bank. You actually create a relationship with them where they're making money off your money. Instead of keeping your money under a mattress, you take it and you put it into a bank account. And when you put it into a bank account, it's kind of the same idea. It's like, hey, let me put my money in this bank account that's going to be secured and it's going to make me some interest. And I'm safe. I feel comfortable. Everything's stable. But what you don't realize is at the same time, that bank takes your money, they put it and they deposit it, or so you think. But really what they do is they put it back into circulation. When they put it back into circulation, they start lending that money out to other people. Now the thing is, that's not their money. That was your money. You just literally give them the ability and the right to use it. And so when they take that money in, they're lending it out to someone else and they're doing it at a higher rate of interest. So they're making sure you get your interest, but then they're actually charging interest to whoever they lend it out to. So what they're making is called the spread. The same thing I talked about earlier. They're making a spread. And with that, if there's any issues whatsoever, you could try to sue the bank, but the bank's thinking about the risk they're taking on. So, wait, let me get this straight. The bank's making money off of someone else's money. So in other words, they're taking money that's not theirs and they're lending it out to somebody else. They're like the middleman. So the middleman takes money in, they put money out, and they make what's called a spread on the interest or the difference between what they're receiving the money at and what they're giving it out at. And the bank's in a very comfortable position in doing that. The bank's making a lot of money doing that, but they're not taking on the same risks that we think of as consumers. They're taking on a lot less risk. And so when I was speaking to my wife about the whole idea of don't have it in your name, hey, it's the same idea. Do you know all the stuff that a bank owns? If you sue a bank, what are you actually going to get back? I mean, you're signing all these documents in order to get the loan in the first place. So the person that's going to sue them is more likely going to be the person that borrowed the money. But the documents that you sign when you purchase a house, when you purchase a car, those loan documents, the reason those documents are so thick and so long is not to protect you, it's to protect the bank. So if you look at their position, they're offering someone a rate of interest, in which case the person's not going to argue about the interest, and if they do, they always have the option to take the money out of the bank. But then when the bank lends the money out to someone else, they make that other person sign all these documents. So the bank's making money hand over fist, but their risk is extremely low. Now, if they choose to make rash decisions, if they choose that money is sort of, top of the totem pole and we're going to do anything we can do to get it, and they're out of balance, well, they can mess themselves up. But that's nothing that has at least been pressure that's been put on by their clientele, by the people they're actually borrowing the money from or who they're lending it out to. That's their practice. So as a consumer, you want to make sure you're educating this whole idea of asset protection.